So I'm going to attempt to explain a really complicated problem, and in an attempt to not bore you, I'll use an analogy to get my point across. For those of you that understand the real issue at a deeper level, 1, don't beat me up in the chat log below for oversimplifying this thing. And 2, feel free to jump in to help clarify the situation for the rest of us. My goal is to break down this huge problem so even the general public will understand it and want to get involved and fix it. After all, this affects everybody: lenders, realtors, and more importantly, homeowners and future homeowners. So, one day, there was a prince and a princess. The prince and princess were very involved at leading their people and providing resources for all of them. The prince and the princess had very similar approaches on how they would help their people. Both were good at helping their people, although they had kind of slightly different approaches. Different, but both good. Their main goal was to make sure their people had shelter and a place to live and raise their families. They wouldn't simply build or give housing away to their people, but they would work with the entire community to reach their goal of providing shelter for everybody. Pretty good, right? Their role in providing shelter was to lend their people money so they could go in and hire a builder to build shelter. See where we're going with this? By the way, their names were Princess Fanny and Prince Freddie. You see where I'm going with this? Well, one day, the community fell in tough times. The community wasn't doing so well, and wouldn't you know it, the king and the queen stepped in to the prince and princess's operations and said, "Hey, we don't think you guys are gonna make it through these tough times. So we're gonna have to take over your operations." The prince and princess begrudgingly complied, but felt that they could withstand the tough times and make it through. Nevertheless, though, the king and the queen took over their operations. The details of that takeover are pretty crazy and involve an absorbent amount of gold to be paid back to the king and queen, but that's another story for another time. Fast forward a few years, and wouldn't you know it, the king and the queen were right. They did keep things going, and the kingdom made it through the tough times, and the king and the queen continued to lend money to their people so they could in turn hire builders and build shelter. With one small, slight, just minuscule change. The prince and princess were now forced to pay the king and the queen for taking over their operations even after the kingdom had recovered, and the people also needed to pay back the king and the queen in the form of a royalty. Basically, the village owed their well-being to the king and the queen, and to show their appreciation, the villagers had to pay an additional royalty to the king and the queen. Every time the villagers wanted to build a home or borrow money from the king and queen, the villagers were forced to now pay an additional royalty to the king and queen, thus making it harder for the villagers to obtain a loan from them. This was very good for the king and queen, but pretty stressful for the villagers. They didn't understand why they needed to pay an additional royalty and even what the royalty money was going for. What the king and queen didn't tell the villagers was just how they were spending the additional money made from their people. They were using it to build themselves a better castle. The villagers were confused and they were angry. They understood that they needed to pay the king and queen back for their loan that they had made, but why did they need to pay them back an additional royalty? And why was that money funneled into other things that didn't concern their loan? The villagers didn't like these new terms from the king and queen, and they didn't like that they were taking money from the villagers and spending it on absorbent things. Well, guys, that's where our story ends. Because, well, that's where we're at today. Obviously, the prince and princess are Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and obviously the king and the queen are the government. And yes, the villagers are all of us. Oh yeah, the royalty fee charged to the villagers is a real fee as well. It's called a G fee, and whether you know it or not, we all pay it on any loan that is made today when buying a house. And the fee may not be going to build a better castle, but it is being spent on whatever the government wants to spend it on. And that's not right. The government already has a tax system in place that collects tons of money from all of us to pay for schools and roads and parks and tons of other stuff. They don't need to charge homeowners an additional tax on their mortgages and spend that money however they see fit. After all, they've proven to be poor stewards of our money and even worse budgeters, let's be honest. It's not right and it needs to stop. The government acts like they want to reform this situation, but they don't. They have their hands on a cash cow now, and there's no reason for them to let it go, unless the villagers speak up and fight back. Lenders, you have the NMBA that is fighting back for you. NMBA has formed the Action Alliance, and they've made it easy for you guys to fight back as a collective group. I honestly don't know if NAM has something similar. If they do, feel free to share that down below. Now, realtors, you have NAR, who's incredibly powerful. Well, I also don't know if they have an organized effort to stop this. Please get with your elected officials and make sure you guys stand up for your clients' needs. Consumers who are hearing and watching this for the first time, you should be upset. And you should contact your lenders and realtors and ask them what they're doing to fight back. Also, contact your elected officials and make it known that it's not right and you'd like to see GSE reform. Although that may not work because both the left and the right have enjoyed all the money that's been collected by the villagers. They may not want it to stop. I'm sure they love all the additional money. Links to fight back are below, and links to the actual story are below as well. So, villagers, what do you think about all this? Let us know down below. This should be fun, and please share this with somebody. The word needs to get out.